Hello again everyone, here we are, day 2 of the Business Travel Show here at Excel, and I'm here with Paul Tilstone from Festive Road, and really wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the key trends that they're seeing and that they've brought to life through their recent Macroscope report. So Paul, I mean obviously there's so much change at the moment, it just feels like to some extent we're starting with a blank sheet of paper and everyone is taking a chance to reset. And there's a few things particularly that I've noticed, I suppose from our own lives as well. And I was reading a really interesting piece in the press lately from the US about a travel manager saying the job of travel management is changing for a corporate from being very heavily transient, outbound travel, sending your people around the world, to all of a sudden being almost half of it being inbound, bringing your people back in with hybrid working, bringing them back in for meetings. And in a world where kind of historically travel and meetings have always maybe had a slight disconnect for a lot of organisations, despite the efforts of some people together. How do you feel that, do we have an opportunity now to properly merge those two things and address it in a different way?
Yeah, I think there's almost a sort of philosophical mind shift, isn't there, that I think we call it, it was always about the meeting. It's like, what's the reason for travel? Because I think as an industry, we've always been focusing on the facilitation, right? We know that ex-employee needs to get to that destination, and so our job is to provide the logistics to get there. Actually understanding what the reason is for that person to get to that destination, and therefore as a service provider, whether you're a TMC, an airline or a hotel, to start thinking about how you can better service that traveller's needs depending upon what that destination objective is. If it's a meeting, if it's going to HQ to get time with the team, that there's an opportunity to start thinking differently. So I think there's sort of two bits to this. One is about sort of creating more integrated travel and meetings management. And there's all sorts of reasons why that's tough, including you will know this, right, in the GDS, that you get to 9 people and then suddenly it becomes something different, you have to book elsewhere, which is sort of madness in our sector. But I kind of go back to actually just start with that kind of philosophical mindset that most travel is about the meeting, even whether you're going to HQ and that buyer's got all of that travel going to HQ, like it's a meeting at the other end or a number of meetings, and start thinking in those terms. I don't know whether you agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, so are you starting to see, I think, does that mean then we're going to see a switch from quite often, we've always captured that reason for trip, haven't we, in the booking, but quite often it was just a piece of MI that got filed away and put in a report somewhere.
Yeah, it was.
Are we going to see a switch where that's the first question now, and actually companies starting to put different policies and different ways of travelling in place, being driven by the reason for trip rather than it being an afterthought? Yeah,
certainly. It's not all corporates, I don't want to give that impression, but corporates, I think, where either they've got significant spend or they're recognising that the internal infrastructure of the organisation is really fundamentally shifting, are going, hang on a second, what role does travel play within our business? That facilitation of bringing people together, like why do we bring people together? Now then you're in a fundamentally different space when you start talking like that, and actually you're at sort of board level is okay. We might end up spending more on travel if we feel like we need the right decisions to bring people together more in order to drive our business objectives, instead of that age-old mindset of, okay, it's Q4, we need to cut travel because we've got a cut on budgets. They don't think about what the reason for travel is and therefore what it does for the business as a strategic level. So I do think some corporates are thinking like that, not all corporates. Some of them are asking us to kind of go help them to understand what are the core reasons for meeting, and they call it different things, but it's not anymore. I forget what the reason codes were in sort of TMCs and GDSs, but
oh god, no, absolutely, yeah.
They didn't really seem.
No, pick from a drop-down list the one that's most convenient. And then that'll get your booking approved.
I don't know that anyone's ever done anything with that data either. It doesn't sort of seem to resonate in today's world. So I think it is far more than just changing those codes into other things. It's about a mindset as what's the purpose of travel, and I think that's a really interesting time in this particular stage of the industry.
No, absolutely, and I think that also is working in a lot of cases hand in glove with some of this focus on ESG, with sustainability and well-being. Because I think certainly we coming out of the pandemic, we're in a different place now. The conversation 3 or 4 years ago was there was intent perhaps around sustainability, but in practical terms, for a lot of people, it was CO2 reporting and then maybe offsetting. And then you tick the box and you felt your job was done.
It's not enough anymore, is it?
No, it's not. And particularly if you're looking at the reason for trip, why do we travel, what's the ROI? that also, I think, then feeds into the conversation about, well, in that case, yeah, how do we manage sustainability? How do we manage traveller well-being?
Yeah.
This idea of travel, I've heard a few people talk about travel less but travel better.
Yes.
And how do we do that? But again, I think that's something a lot of corporations, I think a lot of the TMCs that service those organisations, they know it as a concept, but how do they bring that to life? How do you start what is such a big conversation? Yeah,
it's interesting. Like, as a small company, so we're 30 people. It's been quite easy for us as a sort of philosophical concept. Every time we make a decision do we need to go to that destination in order to, not necessarily servicing customers, but for our own purposes to drive the business, we go through people, profit, planet, and purpose. So first of all, is there a really clear defined purpose of why you're going there? And are you 100% sure that you can't do it virtually? Yeah. Okay. And it is quite instinctive that you feel like, but once you start asking that question, you do start challenging yourself. And then it's, okay, am I prepared to emit the CO2, given that we've committed to reducing our CO2 as a company this year, and we're just beginning to start measuring it. I don't want to say that we're far down the line. Then it's people. And the people piece isn't just, what's the friction and the impact on me as a traveller and jet lag. It's also, do I derive my energy from being with you at this show? Yeah. And therefore it's important to me to be here, even though it might be a bit tiring. Yeah. Absolutely, 100%. So the people piece has a number of different angles. And then it's kind of profit. In some ways we call it performance. So how can I maximise my trip to do as much as possible in that trip and bring the most return to my business? I think as a larger corporation, like that's quite a big fundamental shift in how you think about travel, and whether you deliver that at an operational level as a TMC, is it your role as TMCs to challenge? Have you thought about people, profit, planet, purpose? I don't think it is. I think it's a sort of conceptual piece within the company. When you're thinking about your face-to-face interaction and the need for travel, think in these terms and really challenge yourself. I think that's quite important.
But perhaps a challenge that the TMC can make at a strategic level with the procurement leads and with the travel managers to say, are you asking these questions of your people internally?
Yeah, I agree. Because it's a quite difficult one for a TMC, because in many ways, there's sort of an inherent conflict within the model of the TMC.
You get paid voting for Christmas.
Exactly. You get paid for at the moment for transactions, or even if it's a management fee for people and the delivery of service. So if you're challenging the very need for travel, is that a really difficult kind of concept? But I think it's the right thing to do. And ultimately, as a TMC, if you start thinking like that, you actually liberate your mind as to, okay, if we are thinking like that, what else can we do to support the corporate? And your point about, if you're thinking about maybe there's less trips, but twice the experience, then what can the TMC do to maximise that experience en route? And I think that's the opportunity at hand.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I suppose if we're talking about travel management, that is travel management as opposed to just travel booking.
Yes.
Are you starting to, we might like to say that it hasn't been the case, but I think that there has always been an element of travel being just seen as a given, as being a perk of the job, as being a force of habit for a lot of people. Is that now post-pandemic? Are you starting to feel that from corporations, that actually even the travellers themselves are starting to say, I don't know whether I do need to do that trip every month that I used to do? Yeah,
I think there's a number of, from the traveller's point of view, there's a number of potential drivers of their behaviour. They've got used to more family time. I look at my own behaviour as a kind of global traveller. I used to be more connected to people at conferences and events than I was to my own local community. Yeah. I remember walking down the high street, I would say to my wife, when did that shop close? And she'd say, 4 years ago. It's like, okay, I'm really detached from my local environment. The pandemic made sure that I damn well got back in touch with my local environment. I'm not sure I want to go back to not knowing what's going on in my local town. I want to see more of my children. I want to see more of my wife. I want to see more of my friends and family. And I know there's a lot of travellers who feel the same about that. And then there's also the kind of contracting all the illnesses when you travel, not just COVID, all the other stuff, and you're bringing that back to your family and your friends. And so I think there is a different mindset. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think, and you make the point about this idea then, well, okay, if perhaps there were fewer trips, how can you get more out of that trip? And how can a TMC get more out of that trip? And this idea, again, a kind of an ideal we've had for a little while, this idea of total trip management, and what that really means. And there's a couple of really interesting things in the Macroscope report talking about total trip management and what that can bring to an organisation, but also talking about the boom in APIs, the new API economy, and moving towards a world. I think it's fair to say at the moment, we'd all like total trip management, but with the content
The reality,
being so fragmented, it's hard.
Yeah.
And I know you and I have talked, we can see a world down the line in the future where absolutely it all is much more seamless and much more integrated. But in practical terms now, where do you think we are now? Where do you think we are over the next 2 or 3 years about trying to bring some of that together and making it easier for corporations and TMCs to use that new technology that is starting to emerge or has emerged and is continuing to emerge to really bring that together?
I don't know whether you feel the same, but for me, my sort of mindset is I'm at the point which is it shouldn't be this difficult.
Yeah.
You know, is actually, and then I challenge myself because I've been working with the banking industry and insurance industry recently, just for our own needs as a corporate. Oh, sorry, I just touched my. I've been working with the banking industry and insurance industry for my own needs as a company. They're I tend to think other industries are further ahead with us when it comes to API economy. Actually, clunky processes, disjointed behaviours. In some ways, we're actually in quite good shape.
We always feel our own pain more than when we look at others, don't we?
Yeah. But I think that the opportunity, like the airline piece, does seem really hard.
Yeah.
There is progress, but it's sticky, muddy, difficult, gritty progress. And there are a few breakthroughs. I think the opportunity is on all the other wonderful content that's out there, which actually as a TMC, we tend to focus on what? Airline, hotel, rail, passport, visa, well-being and maybe a bit of payment.
Yeah.
Actually, there's all the other stuff that we need as people when we travel that I think the TMC could start getting into. From a corporate's point of view, I think some of the bigger corporates, if they've got the will, the skill, and we call it the bill, the investment, they're actually thinking about the whole corporate travel need and breaking it down into all the different components. What do they need in order to facilitate their people moving and maximizing the value of that trip? And then what do they want to start taking control of? What can they plug and play? And what's the role of the TMC in that environment? That's a really interesting moment in time. The reality is probably not as easy as they think, but I think if they are starting to demand it, it will naturally kind of push that development.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of TMCs will look, as you say, at what kind of the shining lights we look to, the big global corporates that often lead the way and say, yeah, but that's not my world.
Yeah.
That's a different thing. So as they look at all of these kind of challenges, all this new environment, for an average TMC, if such a thing exists, how can they learn from what the big guys are doing? How do you think that can help them approach that?
I've always said, think like a big corporate. Let's say a big corporate spend is, £200 million or even £50 million is a pretty reasonable size spend. Actually, as a mid-sized TMC, you have that volume of spend. If you think of yourself as one entity rather than lots of different customers, you've got lots of different demand profiles across those customers. But a large corporate has lots of different demand profiles. So look to those big corporates' behaviour, look at how they're thinking and what they're trying to do, and then apply that to your own world and think as if you're a big corporate with lots of different demand profiles. And I think there are lessons to be learned from the big corporates. It's not a totally different world. It's something that will either drip feed down to you and in your market, or if you think like a big corporate, you can start to behave like that as well. Yeah,
and it does feel change always comes slowly to the travel industry, but we do have this reset moment, this slight blank sheet of paper moment, and now's the time really, isn't it, to start thinking about these things and embrace them.
I think it is. I get it's difficult as well because the sort of natural instinct is, we've had a really hard 2 years, the volumes are back, let's just sit in this moment and get our revenues back up, and let's not change anything. Let's this is working again. But I think that's a short-term view, and the challenges are going to grow, and unless you start rethinking your world, the value you bring to the corporate, what you should do differently, then I think you'll end up further down the line in a more difficult position, definitely, yeah.
I think you're exactly right. Thank you so much, Paul. That's been really great.
It's a pleasure. It's been great to talk to you, and congratulations, and Advantage is clearly onto great and wonderful things. So.
Thank you very much. Thanks,
all right.